The last light of evening slid off the hills like water. The fields below were quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after harvest. Stubble cut low, earth dry and pale, the air holding onto the smell of dust and wheat. At the far edge of the field stood a fence. It hadn't been mended in years. Some boards leaned outward, gray and splintered, the wire sagging like an old man's shoulders. Beyond it, the ground dipped toward the riverbed, nothing more than a ribbon of cracked clay and brittle reeds. A fox sat beside the fence, watching the world fade. He wasn't young anymore. His fur had lost its deep red, dulled into rust and ash. One ear was torn, his tail thick with burrs. He moved like an animal who no longer expected surprises. The day's warmth still clung to the ground, and he could feel it beneath his paws. Faint, fading, but real. He'd come to this spot every evening for a week now, always at the same hour, always sitting in the same patch of shadow where the fence dipped low. On the other side of the fence, near the edge of the field, a small farmhouse stood crooked against the horizon. One light glowed in the kitchen window. The smell of bread drifted through the cooling air. Inside, a woman moved slowly between stove and sink, humming a song too soft to recognize. Her name was Clara Hensley, though no one had called her that in years. She lived alone now, after her husband passed, and the farm shrank to little more than what she could manage. Every night she saw the fox. At first she'd chased him off, clapped her hands, shouted, even threw a rock once. But he never ran far. He'd retreat just beyond the fence and sit there again, watching. Tonight she didn't bother chasing. She stood at the window with a cup of tea and watched him back. "You'll outwait me, won't you?" she said softly. The fox flicked an ear, but didn't move. The sky deepened into blue. Crickets started their slow rhythm, the sound rising like breath. A single bat flickered past. Somewhere, far off, a train moaned across the valley, distant, hollow, carrying the weight of places neither of them would ever see. Clara set her cup down. "You're not after the chickens anymore," she murmured. "You just come to look." The fox blinked once, slow and deliberate. She sighed. "You and me both, then." The lamp in the kitchen dimmed. The night pressed closer, soft and endless. Clara turned away from the window, her steps creaking through the empty house. Outside, the fox stayed still. The wind shifted, bringing with it the faint scent of flour, iron, and wood smoke. He lifted his nose to it, eyes half closed, as if memorizing it. Then, a sound. From the far end of the fence, something moved. A loose board fell, thudding against the earth. The fox flinched, then turned sharply toward the noise. Nothing there but the dark. Still he waited, ears high, tail stiff. The wind quieted. The stars began to appear, slow, cautious, as if unsure this place deserved them. The fox took one step forward, paused silent on the dry soil. He nosed at the broken board, sniffed the wood, then stopped. The scent was old, familiar. He looked up at the farmhouse again. The window light flickered once, then went dark. The night deepened, but no longer felt empty. He settled back beside the fence, curling his body against the cool ground. His breath came slow, his eyes half open, fixed on the dark shape of the house across the field. He would wait, and above him, the stars grew brighter, one by one. But the night, as if distracted by its own silence, forgot to whisper his name. The next morning began gray and windless. The mist had crept in before dawn, rolling down from the hills until the whole valley seemed caught between sleep and waking. The fields, the road, even the fence looked washed out, their edges blurred by the damp. Clara Hensley stood on the porch, with her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. The boards beneath her feet creaked faintly. She could smell the wet soil, the faint sweetness of grass trying to recover from the dry season. She looked toward the fence. The fox was gone, but the ground beneath the low board was marked, a shallow depression where he'd lain, faint paw prints leading away toward the riverbed. She sighed, half relieved, half disappointed. "You'll be back," she said under her breath. She went inside and started her morning the same as always. Kettle, bread, the quiet murmur of the radio that only half caught the signal from the next county. The house felt larger since her husband had gone. Too many chairs, too much air. The sound of the radio barely filled it. By noon, the mist had burned away. The light turned hard, pale, unforgiving. Clara walked out to the fence again with a tin pail of scraps, bread crusts, a heel of cheese, the last of last night's stew. She set it down near the sagging post and looked around. Nothing moved except the grass. She crouched, knees popping softly. "You look thinner every time," she murmured, even though he wasn't there to hear. "You'll waste away waiting for nothing." From far off, a crow called once. The sound carried across the fields like a question left unanswered. Clara stood, brushing her hands against her apron. She looked up at the hills, their slopes turning gold under the late sun. The silence was thick enough to hear the soft buzz of flies near the fence. Then, a flicker of red in the corner of her eye. She turned. The fox stood halfway between the fence and the tree line, motionless. His fur caught the light, dull but warm, his shape sharp against the field's fading green. He wasn't watching her. Not exactly. He was watching the house. She froze, not wanting to break the moment. The distance between them felt fragile, like glass. "You," she whispered. The fox tilted his head slightly, then took one step closer. His movement was quiet, deliberate, like he was testing the ground for the memory of his last visit. Clara smiled, just a small curve of the mouth. "You don't even remember me, do you?" She didn't expect an answer, but something in the way he looked at her made her wonder. Years ago, maybe 10, maybe 12, a pair of fox kits had nested near the orchard. Her husband, Frank, had cursed them for stealing eggs, but she'd left bits of bread by the fence anyway. Sometimes at dusk, one of the kits had come close enough for her to see its eyes, bright, wary, curious. That was before the drought, before the farm shrank, before everything went quiet. Clara stepped forward slowly until her hand rested on the top rail of the fence. The fox didn't move. His ears twitched, his gaze steady. "Maybe you're the same one," she said softly. "Maybe you never left." A gust of wind moved through the grass then, sudden and dry, stirring dust from the road. The fox blinked once, then turned, slipping soundlessly back toward the trees. Clara exhaled, long and slow. "You always know when to go." She looked down at the tin pail, still full, the stew beginning to congeal in the heat. With a small shake of her head, she turned back toward the house. But halfway there, she stopped. At the edge of the field, near where the fox had stood, something caught the light, a faint glint against the dirt. She walked closer, squinting. It was a piece of wire, rusted and bent, half buried in the soil. One end curled like a loop, the other frayed to a sharp point. Old fence wire, the kind Frank had used years ago before it rusted through. She picked it up, felt its weight. The end of it was dark, stained, not with rust, but with something older. She wiped her thumb across it, leaving a faint reddish smear. "Not last night," she murmured. "Long before." She tucked it into her apron pocket and looked back toward the trees. The fox was gone. That evening, when the sky began to darken again, she lit the lamp in the kitchen window and sat by it, hands wrapped around her cup. Outside, the fence waited, the low post leaning into the fading light. The air cooled and the crickets began again. And though she couldn't see him, Clara knew the fox was there, somewhere between the shadows and the stars, waiting in that quiet space where memory forgets and the night forgets to call things by their names. By the third night, the air had turned colder, the kind of cold that doesn't rush in but creeps, slow, careful, patient, settling into the corners of things. The fields were stripped bare now, the soil dark and damp from the short rain that had passed in the afternoon. The scent of it still lingered, heavy with earth and iron. Claire Hensley lit the lamp early. Its soft yellow light spilled across the kitchen, cutting a narrow line through the darkness beyond the window. She didn't turn on the radio this time. The silence felt right. Outside, the fence leaned further with each day. The post where the fox had waited was half sunk in the ground, one of its nails sticking out at an angle like a tooth from an old jawbone. The pail she had left yesterday was gone, dragged off into the weeds. Only a few scraps of bread crusts remained, scattered like bones. Clara stood at the window, her tea cooling untouched. "You could at least say thank you," she murmured. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. Beyond the fence, something moved. She set the cup down, leaned closer. The fox stood there again, in the same place he always did, low to the ground, still as stone. His fur was darker now, matted by the rain. He looked smaller, or maybe the night had grown larger around him. Clara opened the door slowly. The hinges groaned, loud in the quiet. She stepped outside, the chill biting her cheeks. "You keep coming back," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Why here?" The fox's eyes caught the lamplight. For a heartbeat, they glowed, not bright, just reflective, like twin coins at the bottom of a well. He didn't move. Clara took a few steps toward the fence. The grass brushed against her skirt, damp and whispering. The smell of wet earth rose around her, mingling with the faint smoke from the stovepipe. "You're not afraid," she said. "You should be." The fox tilted his head, and then she saw it, a limp in his left hind leg, barely noticeable but real. He shifted his weight every few seconds, careful not to rest too much on it. Clara's face softened. "So that's what keeps you close." She crouched by the fence, knees stiff, one hand gripping the post for balance. "You hurt yourself, didn't you?" The fox didn't move. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the piece of rusted wire she had found the day before. The end of it was still stained dark. She held it up. Was it this? A gust of wind moved through the grass, carrying the faint sound of the riverbed below, dry reeds rustling like paper. The fox blinked slowly. Clara sighed. "You've been caught here before, haven't you? That's why you keep coming back. The fence remembers you." She set the wire down beside the post. "Well, I'll mend it tomorrow so it doesn't catch anyone else." The fox took a step forward, just one, and stopped. "Don't," she whispered. "You don't owe me anything." For a moment, they stayed like that. Woman and animal, both quiet, both caught in the pause between breath and movement. Then, from up the road, a sound broke the stillness. The grind of tires on wet gravel, the low hum of an old truck engine. Headlights cut through the dark, sweeping across the field in wide, white arcs. The fox flinched, turning sharply toward the trees. Clara stood shielding her eyes from the glare. The truck slowed, then stopped near the fence. The door opened and a man climbed out, tall, broad, the kind of shape that still looked like work, even when standing still. "Evenin', Mrs. Hensley," he called. It was Tom Carter, the neighbor from 2 miles east. He'd helped her with repairs now and then. "Tom," she said, lowering her hand, "what brings you out?" "Fence on my end's down again. Thought I'd warn you. Something's been digging near the posts. Maybe coyotes." Clara glanced toward the fox's shadowed shape near the tree line. "Maybe," she said. Tom walked up, shining his flashlight along the boards. The beam caught the rusted wire, the deep scratches on the wood. "You seen anything?" "Nothing worth chasing," she said. Tom grunted. "I'll bring my tools tomorrow. We'll patch this up proper." He tipped his hat and went back to the truck. The headlights swept the field once more, and in that brief wash of light, the fox was gone. When the sound of the engine faded into the hills, Clara turned back toward the fence. Only the wire remained, glinting faintly in the lamplight. She whispered, "You're still limping, aren't you? I can't fix that for you." She walked back to the porch, pausing once to look at the tree line. The stars were bright tonight, cold, distant, sharp enough to draw blood. Inside, the lamp flickered again. And in that quiet, before she closed the door, she thought she heard it. A faint rustle in the grass. A soft, slow step just beyond sight. The fox had returned to his place by the fence, silent as ever. He waited. And though the night stretched deep and wide, filled with sound and shadow, it gave him no name to answer to. The next day dawned pale and dry. Clouds hung low, thin and streaked like smoke, letting in only a dull, silvery light that flattened everything it touched. The world seemed half asleep, the air heavy, the fields colorless, and the fence leaning farther than before. Clara Hensley didn't go out in the morning. She watched from the window, hands wrapped around a cup that had long gone cold. The radio mumbled softly on the counter, a preacher's voice low and distant, half lost to static. She turned the dial until it clicked off. Silence suited the house better. By midday, she stepped outside with a coat thrown over her shoulders. The ground crunched faintly beneath her boots. The smell of frost lingered in the air, the first real hint of winter. She crossed the yard toward the fence, her steps slow. The post where she always saw him stood bare. The grass around it was flattened, and the rusted wire she'd left there was gone. She frowned, crouching down to touch the earth. It was cold, but not untouched. The soil was turned. Faint prints pressed into it, not deep but recent. She whispered, "You came back." From the tree line, the wind shifted. The branches swayed, the leaves whispering dry secrets to one another. And through that whisper, she thought she heard something else. A sound low and sharp, like a breath drawn through teeth. She stood quickly, eyes scanning the field. Nothing moved. The fence creaked once softly as if remembering her weight. The rest of the day passed in fragments. She fixed the hinge on the back door, swept the porch, boiled potatoes she didn't eat. Every so often she glanced toward the fence. Each time the space beside it looked emptier than before. When dusk came, she lit the lamp early. The yellow glow filled the kitchen, pushing back the gray edges of the day. Outside, the world turned to shadow. That was when she saw him again. The fox stood near the same post, one paw lifted, his head tilted toward the window. His fur caught the lamplight faintly, turning his shape into something between red and brown, shadow and ember. Clara stepped closer to the glass. "You're late tonight," she said softly. He didn't move. She watched him for a long moment, then reached for the doorknob. The wind hissed softly as the door opened. Cold air poured in, curling around her legs like water. The fox took a step forward, closer to the fence. He didn't run this time. Clara walked slowly down the steps, her breath visible in the air. "I fixed the wire," she said. "You won't get caught again." The fox's ears flicked. His body was tense, alert, ready, but not afraid. She crouched near the fence, keeping her distance. "I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted you gone." That was before I realized how quiet it gets when nothing visits anymore. The fox lowered his head slightly, eyes catching the light. She could see the frost forming on his whiskers. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "I can bring something." But before she could stand, the wind rose again, hard and cold, snapping the dry grass flat. The fox turned his head sharply toward the hill, ears pricked. A sound carried through the air, distant, hollow, metallic. A gunshot. Clara froze. "No," she whispered. The fox bolted, vanishing into the tall grass in one long, silent motion. The fence shuddered as he passed through. "Don't!" she called out, but her voice barely reached the trees. She stayed by the fence long after the sound had died. Her breath came shallow, eyes searching the dark. The night deepened fast. The stars appeared one by one, dim and cold. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, then stopped. Clara finally stood, brushing her hands against her coat. "Please," she said to the air, "don't let him be gone." When she turned back toward the house, she saw it, faint, almost hidden, a streak of red against the pale frost near the fence post. She knelt, heart thudding. The smear was thin, small, already drying. She touched it lightly. It was warm. Her voice trembled. "You're close." She looked toward the trees again, but saw nothing. Only the dark shifting between trunks, the wind threading through branches, the field whispering under its own breath. Then, a flicker. At the far edge of the field, near where the land dipped toward the riverbed, a shape moved, low, limping, but steady. The fox. He paused once, looking back toward the fence. His breath rose white in the cold air. For a second, his eyes reflected the lamplight from her window, two small stars burning against the black. Then, he turned and disappeared into the trees. Clara stayed kneeling until her knees ached, and the cold bit through her coat. Finally, she stood and walked back to the porch. The lamp still burned inside, spilling light across the ground. But it didn't seem to reach as far as it used to. She closed the door behind her, whispering, "I'll leave the light on anyway." Outside, the fence creaked once in the wind, and the night, wide, endless, and full of names it couldn't remember, kept its silence.